work is not built on nostalgia. I analyze historical events, and I use academic and oral history methodology. My primary sources are the National Archives in Ottawa and oral history interviews that I have done in Montreal with the families of the internees. I've examined the internment of the Italian Canadians from the top down and from the bottom up. I also visited the former site of the internment camp in Petawawa, and my expectation of visiting the past in the present was completely unrealistic. There was practically nothing there, and this affected me because it was saying that this chapter in our history was cast aside. It's also a personal story, as you know, because my grandfather was interned, and this is what started my research in the first place. I wanted to know what happened. I want to go back to the 1930s and the 1940s in Montreal and ask you this. What happens when a society labels an ethnic group as an enemy? And what happens when you're part of that ethnic group? You're Italian Canadian, and one side of your hyphen is at war with the other side. How do you negotiate that? How do you go from being Guido Cassini, a celebrated artist, to Guido Cassini, prisoner of war, number 474? What did it do to these men? According to Guido's son, Romano, he tells me that his father became a very nervous man, and he never found peace. He would often go into the forest by himself. Alfredo Sebastiani started a shoe company in Montreal called La Gioconda Shoes. It was named after Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Sebastiani came to Montreal in 1904, and through diligence starts a very profitable shoe business. It grows to over 2,000 employees, spanning 3 factories. His high-end designer shoes are exported abroad. Even the Queen of England ordered shoes from La Gioconda with jewels on them. He lived in Outremont. He was the first president of La Casa d'Italia, a leader of the Order of Sons of Italy, and the Fascio. Sebastiani, by the time he was interned, was a very prestigious and wealthy man. There was an article about him in the Gazette in 1926, and the reporter comments on the name of the company, La Gioconda. In this quote, we get our first glimpse of discrimination. The reporter writes, "One cannot help wishing that some other name more suggestive of a Canadian enterprise had been chosen." Now, the article applauds the success of La Gioconda, but his remark about the company name suggests that Sebastiani should keep his Italianità more discreet. In the same article, Sebastiani gives us a clue as to what the social climate was like in 1926 in Montreal. There were thousands that would come to Montreal, to Canada, he says, and help build it up if we would only show them that we want them. What he's saying is that Canada should be more welcoming to immigrants, and if they were, we would all prosper. Sebastiani had no children, and so he sponsored 2 of his nephews to come to Canada with a view of having them take over the business. Giuseppe Di Pietro was the accountant, and his brother Antonio was the shoe designer. All 3 were arrested. The government takes over the factories. During the war, the business thrives because they were making shoes for the military. But a short time later, all the factories are shut down. Sebastiani dies in 1948. The nephews were never able to regain their wealth and the community standing that they enjoyed before the war. Giuseppe Di Pietro, the accountant, has difficulty finding work. He finds odd jobs, including being a janitor in an apartment building. He anglicizes his name to Joseph to escape the social stigma attached to Italians. After that, his son tells me that Joseph was always afraid to question the status quo. His brother, Antonio, goes back and forth from Italy. He can't find peace. I was struck by this photo over here. We see Antonio standing in front of his shop. He went from being a shoe designer of an international label to owning Steve's Shoe Repair. His identity was completely erased. This is a pattern that I heard with many families, whether they were barbers, businessmen, or builders. After the internment, their spirits were extinguished. The ink on that enemy stamp didn't wash away after the war. The attitudes lingered. Internment was intended to be a precaution against any possible action that could have threatened Canadian security. I don't think anyone is going to argue that the government needs to protect its citizens during a war. But where do we draw the line? The way it worked was that during wartime, the Minister of Justice had the right to take measures to prevent an act from happening. This means he didn't actually have to commit a crime or break the law to be interned. You could be punished based on doubt, what if, maybe, perhaps. And consider that during wartime and peacetime, one is never committed if there is any doubt. According to the former Deputy Minister of Justice and also a retired Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Frank Iacobucci, he says, there was no basis for this other than stereotyping and insensitivity to human rights and values. They were treated worse than second class. They were treated as no class, not deserving of any kind of due process. It's a stain on the memory of the country. You cannot defend it by any sense of legality, and when you look at the moral side of it, well, it's completely indefensible. What he's saying is that the internment caused harm beyond acceptability. Now, the internment may have attacked the leaders of the colony, but the label attacked all Italians. This image maps out the voyage of the internees. In Montreal, the men were brought to their local police stations and then transferred to the provincial police station in Old Montreal in Notre Dame. After a couple of days, a number were sent to Fort Saint-Jean and then to Bordeaux jail. Camp Petawawa had to prepare for their arrival. This is why they were in these, either at Fort Saint-Jean or Bordeaux, or both. Internees were released at different times, but those that were still in Petawawa by July 1942 were transferred to Fredericton. Dr. Vittorio Gastaldi arrived in Montreal in 1900. He was a physician. He married a French Canadian. Her father was a judge. Ristaldi was the Italian vice consulate and a delegate general of the Italian Red Cross. He also imported wines and spirits from Italy. He was 65 years old when he was arrested and interned for almost 2 years. After, he returned to Italy and wrote about his experience. Here, Ristaldi describes his impression when he was brought to Bordeaux jail. Like the common delinquents that were there, we were thrown into individual cells. No communication with anyone. We cannot describe the moral effect this had on us. I had to stay in my cell for 11 days without a shirt and socks because I expressed how much I missed my toothbrush. In that illustration that's done by Vincenzo Poggi, that's an illustration of Ristaldi. I don't have a